So now what we want to discuss is the concept of a Lambda expression. And we're also going to compare that against what we call an anonymous function. Now, you may have also heard the term Lambda function, which really we refer to as a Lambda expression. In JavaScript, functions can be used as data because they're also first-class citizens, which means that they can also be declared as a value, such as being assigned to a variable. Now, a Lambda expression typically exists in other languages, such as Python, for example, which defines a Lambda as an anonymous function used as data. And in the JavaScript community, there is much debate on whether a function is a true Lambda function if it does in fact have a name, which we'll also explore in this video. Now, for us to master our functional programming and understand the whole reasons why we're looking at these Lambda expressions, we're going to iterate over our items array. Now, first off, we're going to look at just a normal function. So here I'm going to say get the item name. We're then going to pass in the item, and inside the body of the function, we can just simply return the item's name. So that means that we can go to our items, and you can see that we have everything logged out in the console. And we're going to pass this function in as a value, which we are allowed to do in JavaScript. So let's save this out, and you can see that we've now returned each item's name. Now, this is what we call a function declaration. This is not an expression. An expression would be assigned to a variable. For example, we could say get item name expression, and by assigning the value of our function, it becomes an expression instead of a function declaration, which is exactly what this is here. So a function declaration is not considered a Lambda function, nor is this function being used anonymously. And the fact that it's not anonymous means that it has a function name here. If we were to do this, perhaps as part of a callback, which you may have seen something like this or do something like this in your daily development, that's called an anonymous function, which means that it cannot be re-accessed after it is created. We cannot reference this function variable anywhere. So with that in mind, we'll leave our example as it was. This is our first example of looking at what a function declaration, which we have named in this case, can be used as with items.map. Now we're going to stay with our example of items.map and just investigate what could be a Lambda expression. So again, if we go console.log, I'm going to just add the expression inside of our map. So we're not going to create a function outside of the log. Now this is what we would typically do, and we'd say something like item. So here we are in fact creating an anonymous function. However, as part of a callback, it could in fact be somewhat considered a Lambda expression, or at least a Lambda function, because it's going to behave exactly as, which we'll see in a moment, our Lambda expression does. And to be fair, the term Lambda expression, you shouldn't need to get too hung up about. You've probably been using it already, and we're just clarifying some of these concepts. So this does the exact same thing as our first example, as we'd expect, but we're just talking conceptually about the difference between a function declaration and an anonymous function. Now, what's also interesting is if we wanted to, we could create a named anonymous function as well. However, a Lambda function in other languages is considered an anonymous function purely. However, in JavaScript, there is much debate, because if we were to take this, for example, and this might be something that you do on a regular basis, we say, let's refactor this, I can make it shorter, and we then use the new ES6 function syntax to then implicitly return our item.name. Now, some of the functional programming purists will be more in favor of using this syntax over this syntax. And this is typically because we refer to it as a Lambda expression. And what did we say about expressions is that they typically get bound to a variable. So here we could say get item name expression, and above we could say const get item name expression, and then assign the value of our Lambda function, or in this case, our Lambda expression. Now, the key difference between what is and what isn't a Lambda function or a Lambda expression is the fact that we are passing the value of our function to be used as data elsewhere in our application. We're not calling this function directly, are we? We are simply passing it as an argument into another function. And this is an important thing that we can learn for our functional programming journey. what we would typically do with functional programming is use these Lambda functions to compose more complex functions in the functional programming paradigm. And we'll be exploring this as we continue through the chapter. So I think that's all we need to look at for this video. This is your introduction to Lambda expressions. If you've not heard the term, or perhaps you've seen the term online and now you want to really dig into it, hopefully this has given you some further insight. Of course, in reality, our ES6 arrow function, that fat arrow function, does do the exact same thing here, but conceptually in the functional world, this would be considered a Lambda expression, and using the function keyword or even naming the function would not be considered a Lambda expression, even though they behave and act exactly the same. So this is more about conceptually considering your code when we write our JavaScript. So that's it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one.